Take a good look on your way out. Hi, my name is Dallan Beck, and I'm an instructor at the Recording Institute in Hollywood, California. I've been an engineer, producer, singer, songwriter, guitarist, and all-around musician for the last 10 years. And let me tell you, I wish there had been a practical learning tool like this video for me to follow when I first started learning the recording process. Instead, I had to do everything by trial and error. Quite frankly, I think I've done just about everything wrong at one time or another in order to get it right. That's why I'm happy to be doing this video today. Using my past experiences, I'm going to show you the essentials of home recording and some shortcuts to doing things right the first time. And what better way to learn home recording than by doing home recording? In this video, you're going to watch me record a basic song. As I record each part, I'll introduce a new lesson. In this way, you'll learn not only how to record a wide variety of instruments, but also the basic concepts of signal flow, which you can apply to every instrument at every level of the recording process. If at all possible, please follow along with every one of my examples at home. Feel free to pause the video as necessary while you make your connections or set your levels. Just please don't let the information slip away. Use it and use it immediately. All right, are you ready? Good. Let's get started. Let's start by examining the components we'll need to make a basic demo. First, we need a recording device. I'm going to be using an 8-track digital tape-based format. Now, yours could be the same, could have more tracks, less tracks, be analog or computer-based. Right now, it doesn't matter as long as you have a device with the ability to multitrack. This means your standard cassette recorder doesn't count. A multitrack is a machine that can record on separate tracks while playing back others. Let me show you an example. I'm going to have the drums on tracks 1 and 2. The bass on its own track on 3. Guitars on 4 and 8. You get the idea. This also means then you can layer. Layering is a term you should become very familiar with. It is the essence of multi-track recording. It's the ability to record tracks separately or next to each other, but at separate times. Do you think I actually recorded all of these at the same time? No. What I was allowed to do was to record the drums, then play bass to the drums, then acoustic guitar to the bass, then I could go back and fix the bass. Layering allows you to alter things at any point in time. If this is getting confusing already, just please be patient and continue to watch the video. I assure you that it will become crystal clear. Okay, back to multitracking. Look at your machine and determine how many tracks you have. Got it? Good. Now before you start laying down drum tracks, it's important that you make a track sheet for however many tracks you're going to be using. It basically lays out how I'm going to be recording the 8 tracks that I have available. Drums will be on 1 and 2. Bass on 3, acoustic guitars on 4 and 5, keyboard sounds on 6, vocals on 7, and lead guitar on 8. You'll have to decide how to make the most with the tracks you have. For example, if you have only 4 tracks, everything will be in mono, meaning 1 track for the whole sound, and you won't have a lot of room for added instruments. If this is the case, stick to your basics: drums, bass, guitar, and vocal, or drums, bass, keys, vocal. When you have a lot of tracks, like most hard disk units, you can do more doubling of parts and have different sounds for one instrument, like microphone sounds and direct sounds. Regardless, it's important to organize your approach before you begin so you don't get caught running out of tracks. So make a track sheet right now and be sure to update it if you make any changes later. Next, let's look at the mixer. I'm going to be using this 16-channel Mackie board. There are a few key parts that you need to locate. First, let's find your preamps. The preamp knob is responsible for gain or volume after the microphone. Next, find your faders. Some are individual faders for sending sound to tape or returning sound back from tape. Others are group faders. They're used for controlling the volumes of the individuals. And last but not least, you should have a main or stereo bus fader that controls the overall output of everything. Next is the EQ section. Mine is labeled high, mid, and low for the high frequencies, the middle frequencies, and the low frequencies. EQ will help us add or subtract frequencies within the sound to make it brighter, duller, warmer, smoother, whatever you need. Next, find your auxiliaries or effects cue sends. These are added outputs that send the signal to other places than the multitrack and the stereo bus, like headphones and effects units. Find all of these knobs as well as the jacks for connecting to the gear. Now comes the monitor system. I say system because there are two important parts: the speakers and the power amp. You may have speakers with a power amp built in, and this will save space and extra cabling. But regardless of what type of system you have, locate these two components right now. For those of you looking at an empty space in your workstation where the speakers would normally be, find a pair of headphones and the headphone output controls on your mixer. This is your other option. The idea behind monitoring systems is to be able to hear everything that is being recorded accurately. Big speakers play back low end well, but you're going to have to turn them up pretty loud to be functional. Smaller speakers, like these, called near fields, respond well to normal listening level, but not the lowest of frequencies. Headphones give great spatial separation, but they're kind of hard to trust because the qualities can vary drastically. Every monitor system has its pros and cons, and the professional method is to use all three at different times and get each one to sound good. What you're trying to do is develop trust with your speakers. This involves some trial and error. You're trusting that what you hear while you're tracking at home will sound just as good on someone else's system later. A good way to minimize this error is to use referencing. No, I'm not talking about using a dictionary. I'm talking about listening to professionally recorded CDs on your speakers and trying to get your sound as close as possible to the reference CD sound of your mix. To do this, you're going to focus on the levels, the panning, and the frequency responses. Now, let's take a look at your transducers. Ugh, big word. However, transducers are just the components you're going to use to transfer sound from one form to another. In other words, microphones and direct recording devices. I'm going to use both in the video today. If you're doing vocals, you're going to need a microphone. If you're using keyboards or bass, you might want to use a direct box. For guitar sounds, you can either mic them up or you could use something like this pod, which is an amp simulator. That said, gather your microphones and your direct boxes and get them ready. Next, in order to add a little spice to your recordings, you'll probably have at least one effect, like reverb, delay, or chorus, or like me, a multi-effect processor that can do all those simultaneously. You can purchase these separately, but you might also find that nowadays some are actually built into the mixers and direct recording devices. Continuing on with the gear, you're going to need a mixdown machine. That's just a fancy word for a stereo recording device like a cassette recorder or CD recorder. It's important to be able to listen to what you've recorded away from your home studio. You know, at your friend's house, in your car, in prison, at parties, wherever. Last but not least are the raw materials. I'll be using this digital 8mm tape for my multitrack, and I'll use a 2-track digital tape. You might be using analog cassette for 2-track or analog 4-track for your multitrack. And also the cables to hook everything up. Check out your machine to determine the type of cables you'll need. The most common are RCA. These are for stereo mixdown and for me to connect to my multitrack. 1/4 inch. These are essential for connecting keyboards, guitars, bass, sequencers, and your effects processor. And an XLR cable. I'm going to need this for my microphone. If you haven't invested in these cables yet, don't skimp. Think of every machine, cable, mic, instrument as being links in a chain. Your recording is only as strong as its weakest link, including cables. Always try to get the best you can afford. Since my mixer and multitrack are separate units, I'm going to need to start by hooking up the direct outputs of the mixer with the inputs of the multitrack. Now, numbers 1 through 8 on the mixer go into inputs 1 through 8 on the multitrack. Then they'll need to come back out of the outputs of the multitrack into the inputs of the mixer. But the outputs 1 through 8 on the multitrack go back into 8 different channels, numbers 9 through 16 on the mixing board. So, channel 1 went to track 1, came back to channel 9. Channel 2 went to track 2, came back to channel 10. In this way, sound can be sent to the recorder to be stored on tape, and the sound can return back from the recorder to allow us to hear the results, with each channel having separate faders for controls. Now, if your mixer or recorder is one unit, then you don't have to worry about any of this. It's already connected internally, and you won't have the channels separated into sends 1 through 8 and returns 9 through 16. You'll have the same numbers. One fader will control both signal paths. Now, the combined sound, or the overall output of the tracks, needs to be connected to your power amp. Find your stereo outputs or main output jacks. Take 2 cables and connect those to the inputs of your power amp. Then, out of the power amp, we're going to have the left and right feeding your left and right monitors or speakers using speaker cable. Now listen, speaker cable is a little different than regular 1/4 inch cable, although it can have the same type of end connectors. Speaker cable is designed to handle more signal than regular line level cable. The words speaker cable are usually printed on the outside of the cable so you can figure it out. Throughout your initial setup, please remember to keep all of your volumes turned all the way down, power amp, mixer, everything, so you don't blow anything up. Later, we'll bring everything up to the desired level. Next, let's connect your effects unit. If you're using a standalone unit like I am, the outputs of auxiliary send number 1 and 2 on the back of the mixer are going to need to go into the inputs of your effect device, left and right. Now the outputs of the effects, left and right, come back to the auxiliary return to one number, number 1, left and right. Now because I'm using a true stereo effect unit, I'm going to need 2 aux send channels to take full advantage of the effects possibilities. If you only have one available aux, you'll be working in mono and just connect aux 1 to your effects unit, then back out to one side of the aux return number 1. There is usually a separate stereo output for connecting to your mixdown device. Mine is labeled tape output. Now if you don't have one, don't worry. We'll just connect the stereo recorder between your mixer and power amp using the main outputs at the very end when it's time to mix down. Last but not least, I'm going to need to format my tape in order to record on it. Formatting is the process of putting the numbers, what we call time code, onto the tape. In this way, the recorder then follows the numbers perfectly in time for playing, fast forwarding, rewinding, and recording. Only digital tape and some hard disk units need to be formatted. Analog tape doesn't run on time code. It runs on motor transport speed, which is just basically how fast the reels spin, and so it does not need to be formatted. So, if you're using an analog tape machine, simply insert a high-quality blank tape into the recorder. For those of you, like me, using digital tape, please understand that just like a floppy disk on a computer, formatting erases everything on the tape. So you only do it once before you record anything, and then never again unless you want to erase everything on the tape. If you're unsure as to whether or not you need to format, tapes that need formatting are completely unusable unless they have been formatted. So if you press play and see the numbers scroll, you're good to go. Let's start by laying down some drums. I'll be using a drum loop with some percussion sounds added in that I did on my computer at home. Sometimes I'll use a drum machine or a sequencer, electronic drum kit, or live kit. Whatever the method, I'm going to put these sounds into channels 1 and 2 on the mixer. When a sound gets 2 channels, it's because there is some difference between the 2 inputs. In this case, the sound is stereo and has different sounds on the left and right sides, like the hi-hat sounds, cymbals, and percussions. Because I have room for it in my setup, I'll take advantage of having stereo drums for more clarity when we mix down. If you don't have extra tracks available, you can use 1 channel and 1 track on the tape machine. As for the levels, the output of the drum loop is at maximum and the gain or trim controls are turned all the way down on the mixer. This is just a safety precaution to start with. Next, I'm going to set the faders at unity gain, which is 0 on most mixers. This means that the faders aren't adding or subtracting any volume from my original sounds. The next step is to assign channels 1 and 2 to go to tracks 1 and 2 on the recorder. For me, all I have to do is arm or put into record tracks 1 and 2, like this. Some of you may have to assign the channels first, but it's all the same in the end. Just remember that left is usually the same as odd, and right is the same as even if you have to use your pan knob. In order to get a sound to go to track 1, it may have to be panned to the left as well as assigned with the number 1. Now I'm going to turn up the preamp until the volume peaks at the tape. After it peaks, I'll back it down just enough to keep it from peaking. Now, let's return it from tape so we can hear it. Remember, I set mine up to return on channels 9 and 10. I'm going to bring these faders up to unity gain. And then I'm going to assign them to the outputs where the master fader is. Next, I bring up the master fader up to unity gain as well. Still no sound? That's okay, because we haven't turned up our power amp yet. Now normally, power amps are set at the maximum volume, and the mixer is going to control the overall volume. However, for safety's sake, we're going to set a comfortable volume that is loud, but not too uncomfortable and won't get you evicted from your apartment. I usually record these pre-recorded sounds, like sequences and loops, without changing them. If I want to add EQ or effects, I'll do it during the mix. Okay, we've got our levels, so now I'm going to set the loop back to the beginning. Okay, now I need to press play and record on the machine and give it a few seconds before starting the loop. A word of advice: if you're using digital tape, try not to record on the first minute. It's the most unstable portion of the reel and tends to have problems such as dropout. Dropout will cause errors in the timecode and result in losing recorded sounds. Now that the drum loop is done, let's disarm your drum tracks. Find those same buttons you pressed to arm the tracks and press them again like this. This will turn off the recording indicator and make the track safe for playback. You don't want to make the mistake of erasing them on accident. Trust me, it's the little errors that make a big difference. Now it's time to record the bass part. We'll record by plugging directly into the back of the mixer on channel 3. Again, the preamp should be all the way down, and the fader should be set up to unity gain. Arm track 3 on the recorder, and then we'll start turning up the preamp. Now, we're going to turn the preamp up to set the level to tape. Now, for returning the sound. Snap quiz. Where does the signal return so we can hear it? You got it, channel 11. So I'll bring up channel 11, assign it to the stereo bus, and presto, bass sound. This time, instead of recording straight to tape, I'm going to use the EQ first. Students always ask me if they should record their sounds with EQ or do it later in the mix. Here's my advice. When you're tracking, try to get the best possible individual sound that you can. If you need EQ to do this, then record with it. When it comes time to mix the entire sounds, I'll use the EQ again if the sounds are not blending well together. What I mean is, like with the bass, for example. When I'm mixing, I'm concerned with how it sounds with the kick drum and the guitars. I'll change it again if it needs to be so that it works well in the whole song. Try this approach and see if it works for you. But in general, here are a few tips to help you get the best results from your EQ, regardless of what instrument you're working on. First, cut before you boost. Find which frequencies to take away before you go adding any others. You'll find that by removing unwanted frequencies, the sound will need less artificial help. Next, going along with tip number 1, you can usually get a desired result by either boosting or cutting. What this means is, for example, if your guitar isn't bright enough for your tastes, chances are it has too much low-mid frequencies. You can either boost the top end, or you could cut to the chase and just cut the low mids. By cutting these low mids, your sound will appear less muddy and all of a sudden sound brighter without any added harshness. And you didn't even touch the top end. Get the idea? An undesirable sound is usually out of balance. Think both directions, what needs to be cut and what needs to be boosted. This way you can balance out your sound. And lastly, most sounds end up sounding just too muddy. This is a common beginner error. Each sound is given all the frequencies, especially lots of bass, in order to make it really big and really full. But the point is that we're trying to paint a picture. And if each design in the picture has all of the colors, and they all get put on top of each other, what color do you think that painting's going to turn into? Gray. Try to give each sound a general area to shine and lack. Then the sounds will complement each other. If they're all fighting for the same frequency space, they'll just cancel each other out or just become dull and indistinct. Some of the best sounds I've ever heard didn't stand very well on their own, but they were amazing in the context of the song. Okay, now let's get back to the bass sound. Your bass can be altered in many different ways with EQ. The important question is, what don't you like about the sound you're hearing? Don't forget that your speakers or your headphones are only putting out a portion of the overall sound. In my case, these small speakers don't have much bass response anyway. How do I know this? Because I've used that reference CD that we talked about with bass sounds that I liked on these speakers, and I found out what was missing. This direct bass sound, though, I think, could use a little help in the low end and a little less muddiness in the low mids. So I'm going to reach in here and I'm going to add just a little 80 hertz and I'm going to take out, well, right about 200 hertz. Much better. Again, it all depends on the sound you're starting with and the sound you're going for. Okay, let's record the bass while playing along with the drum loop. The drums are on tracks 1 and 2. They'll be playing back while track 3 is recording the bass. If you remember, this is called layering, and it's one of the greatest advantages of using a multitrack. I'll make sure that the tape is cued to the beginning of the song. Set that up. And here we go. Play and record. Action. Now that the bass is done, I need to remember to disarm track 3. The next part we're going to add is the acoustic guitar. For this example, I'm going to introduce using a microphone and setting up a headphone mix. First, the microphones. This microphone is a dynamic microphone and it operates on a magnetic principle and therefore does not require a power source other than what's inside of it. However, I'm going to be using a condenser microphone today, which means not only do I have to plug it in, but I also have to turn it on. Condensers operate on an electrostatic principle and therefore need a power supply to work. This power is called phantom power. Cheaper condensers, they can use 9-volt batteries. But your good condenser microphones, they use 48 volts of phantom power, which is usually supplied by your mixer or preamp section. My phantom power is located on the back of this mixer as a switch, which is either on or off for all the channels. If you don't have a power supply and you're using a condenser mic, you'll need to get an external phantom power box. But how do you know if you have a dynamic or a condenser microphone? First, check your manual. If you're like me and you always lose the manual, try a simple test. Just plug the mic in and send sound through it to tape. If it works without any other help, you've got a dynamic microphone and everything's fine. If it's not working, it probably needs phantom power. The good thing about phantom power, though, is that it is not harmful in any way to your dynamic microphones. So, regardless of which type of microphone you have, one of the most common beginner mistakes is using the wrong side of the microphone. If your mic is cylindrical, like this 57 that I was showing you earlier, it's easy to find the right side. Mics like these get pointed at the source. If it's shaped more like this TLM 103, there is a front side and a back side. The front is supposed to be positioned towards the instrument. Finding the front usually can be done by finding the logo or emblem. However, if that doesn't help, I look at the bottom of the microphone and there's always 3 pins that form a triangle. The point of that triangle is the back. Now that I've chosen my microphone, I'm going to show you how to position it. I'm going to start with the microphone positioned around the 12th fret or the neck joint area of the guitar about 1 foot away. If it gets farther than this 1 foot, I'm going to be picking up other sounds in my environment and I need to be very careful to keep the guitar signal as pure as possible. I'm guessing that you don't have an acoustically treated room in superior soundproofing. Without these, you've got to be very careful not to get too far away from the instrument. Then, when I actually hear the sounds that the microphone is picking up, I can go ahead and move it more towards the headstock for a brighter sound, or I can move it more towards the sound hole for a boomier sound. Today, I'll be right around the 12th fret. This condenser mic that I've chosen for today will capture more of the tone of the instrument and will be very clear and precise, but I will risk picking up unwanted noise. Now you can use whichever type of microphone you have, just be sure you understand the differences between the two. For those of you who prefer to use the pickup inside the guitar, Just plug your cable straight into the mixer on channel 4, the same way I'll plug in the microphone into channel 4. As a basic rule, I would use a microphone for strumming parts and a direct input for fingerpick parts. If you have the ability, you can use both and blend them to the same track to get the best parts of both sounds. Since I'm using a microphone for today, I'm not going to want the speakers to listen back on, otherwise I'm going to get feedback. Anytime the microphone is anywhere near speakers, you can create a loop. Also, the background instruments that will be playing back while I'll actually be recording would bleed or blend into the guitar track, and that's not going to be desired either. So what are we going to use today? Headphones. We'll use the headphones to listen to the sound while we record. I've already made sure that my power amp volume is all the way down. Make sure you do that too. Okay, time to get it plugged into the mixer. I'm going to take the cable and plug it in to input number 4. We're going to go through the same basic level process that we did before. Again, make sure, while playing the instrument, make sure the preamp is all the way down again. Bring the fader on 4 up to unity gain. Go over to your multi-track and arm track 4. Now let's get levels by bringing up the mic pre and watching the meters. Again, it peaks and then I bring it back down. And now the acoustic guitar sound will return on channel 12. So I take that fader and bring it up. In order to hear the sound, it's time to plug in the headphones. Make sure that the sound is actually sending to the headphones, and there's usually a button that assigns it that way. With the headphones on, now I can determine whether or not I need to change the sound with EQ or adjust the mic placement. Okay, once you're happy with the sound, it's time to get the other sounds, drums and bass, into your headphones as well. We're going to roll the tape, and at the same time, we're just going to be doing like a rehearsal along with the guitar in order to make sure that all the levels are balanced. Levels are good. Roll back to the top. Okay, if you were paying attention earlier, you'll remember that I said I was going to use 2 tracks for the acoustic guitar. I'll use 2 tracks for different reasons. For some parts of the song, I'll double the track, or that means play the same part twice, in order to get fuller, fatter sounds. Sometimes I'll need those 2 tracks because some of the parts are going to overlap each other from one section to another, and they can't be on the same track. And lastly, there are times where I just basically have 2 different acoustic guitar parts going on at the same time. Okay, let's get to tracking. Now that I'm done recording the acoustic guitar parts, I have to remember to disarm the tracks that I was using. Now we can move on, and we're going to go to using keyboard. Today I'm going to use a basic keyboard piano sound. Piano is normally a stereo instrument and gets 2 tracks, one for the left side and one for the right side. Today I'm not going to be able to dedicate 2 tracks, so I'm just going to use the mono output and give it 1 track. This cable is going to get plugged in to channel 6. As for tweaking, keyboard sounds generally sound pretty good straight out of the box. so I'm not going to change it until it comes time for mixing. For this part, we're going to be recording direct again. Let's see if you remember how to record direct sounds. I've already given you the first part by connecting into channel 6. Next, you guessed it, the fader goes up to 0. Don't forget to arm track 6. Now, while playing, I'm going to try to get the best possible levels to tape by adjusting that mic pre.
That's it.
At this point, the signal returns to channel 14 so I can listen. Gets assigned to the stereo bus. And now, I can either use headphones or monitors since I'm not using the microphone anymore. For today, I'm going to use the monitors because they're much more friendly on my ears. Good to go. I think it's time to talk about panning now. I now have a bunch of sounds and it's going to start to get muddy unless I separate them a little. Panning allows you to use the stereo image to retain clarity with multiple sounds. Find your pan knobs, which are usually labeled L and R for left and right. Because I have stereo drums, I'm going to put them far left and far right. This will make the sounds that are the same in both sides, like the kick and snare, sound in the center, while my hi-hats, cymbals, and percussions will go to either the left side or the right side in varying degrees. The kick and snare are the backbone of the groove, and I think they need to be in the center. They don't conflict with each other because they usually play at different times. Now, the bass is also going to go in the center, along with that kick and snare, because the bass needs to help the kick drum. They work together in the same panning field. They fill each other out. The acoustic guitar is going to go to the left, while the piano that I'm going to record is going to go to the right. Now these sounds will go to either side to balance the other out. It keeps your harmony clear and not lopsided. Imagine wearing headphones and consistently hearing more sound in one side than the other. Not only is it annoying, but your body will always try to balance it out, and you end up trying to turn your head to get an equal mix if you're wearing headphones. Just pay attention to your sounds and how they each fit together like a puzzle, or how they balance each other like a scale. When it gets time to do the vocals, they're going to go in the center, and so will that lead guitar, since the lead guitar's job is to fill when there's no vocal part. We won't have any problem of them overlapping. My job and yours is to keep the mix blended but balanced. Now the sounds have more space to fill without fighting with each other. Okay, enough about panning. Let's get on to recording the piano. Here we go. Okay, now that we've finished the keyboard sounds, I have to remember to disarm the track. Now it's time to get to the really important sound, the vocal. As you can see, I already have my microphone, and I've plugged it into channel 7 into the mixer. If you have a dynamic microphone for vocals, you're going to want to get a lot closer than the 12 inches we normally keep, like 1 to 3 inches away. But be careful, if you get too close, you get proximity effect. This means that the low frequencies will jump out and make the sound too boomy or muddy. Another point to consider is that vocals have a very wide variety of volumes. They go from subtle to screaming at any given moment. You really want to watch your recording levels at all times. Now, unless you have a compressor and know how to use one, you'll need to have the singer compensate by positioning the appropriate distance from the mic at all times. And if this becomes too difficult for the singer to do, I could recommend re-recording those loud phrases later and adjusting your preamp level just for these volumes. Experiment while singing to find the right distance for your vocals. For this song, the mic is less than 6 inches away, and I'm going to be using a pop screen to minimize the percussive noises that come from my lips. Since I'm using a condenser mic again, guess what I'm going to need? That's right, phantom power. We're going to go through the same procedure as before for sending sound to tape. Before it returns though, I've already turned the power amp off and I need to go back to headphones. Again, we don't want to have any feedback or bleed. Here we go. Fader goes up to 0. Arm track 7. And now we go to the preamp and adjust our levels. Check, check. Hey, hey, hey. Take. The sound is going to return back to channel 15. So I've got to grab that fader, bring it back up again. Now I'm going to send the sound of the vocals after tape from channel 15 to the effects unit using an auxiliary send. Mine are located here on 1 and 2. Now they go to the unit 1 and 2 and return back from the unit to the aux returns numbered 1 and 2. Let's take a listen. Check, check. Our first effect that we have today is going to be a nice tight reverb. Reverb is going to give space or depth to the sound. Let's try delay. Check. Hey. Delay is going to add sounds after the original sound to give you more sustain or filler in between the notes. While I'm tracking the vocals, I'm going to prefer to use reverb today. If you have a multi-effect unit, you can use both at the same time. Okay, let's get ready. Let's track the vocals. Take a good look on your way out. Okay, now that the vocals are done, let's disarm track 7. The last part we're going to record is the electric lead guitar. I'm going to go direct using this pod amp simulator. This is going to save me time and allow me to record without the worry of volume. If I use an amplifier, I'll get a more realistic sound, but I'll need to turn it up pretty loud in order for it to sound good, and that's not always possible in a home studio. If you do use an amp though, for the guitar part, I recommend that you take a dynamic microphone and place it roughly 3 inches away from the speaker. The closer you are to the center of the speaker, the harsher the sound is. The closer you are to the edge of the speaker, the smoother the tone is. Okay, I've already plugged into channel 8, and now I need to go through those same steps for recording direct. Follow along with me. First, bring up the fader. Next, arm your track. Next, adjust your preamp while playing to get the right level to tape. And next, bring it up on channel 16. Don't forget to assign it to the stereo bus. And for the guitar, I'm going to want a little reverb. So I'm going to share the exact same setting that I had with the vocals. I'm going to do this by using the auxiliaries. Okay, this is a good time to talk about another wonderful advantage with multi-track recording, punching in and punching out. Guitarists are notorious for playing a great solo, but having one minor thing they'd rather do differently. Punching in is a way to keep the good stuff and simply record over the mistake. Just make sure that it doesn't sound like you're punching in and out. Today's digital recorders are virtually noiseless when it comes to activating the recording heads. Because of this, I recommend punching in during the silences between the notes for optimum quality. If you don't have any gaps or staccato parts, punch in on the actual attack of the beginning of the note. Just never punch in on the sustain. It's almost impossible for the musician to have the exact same tone, pitch, and volume as they had for the previous take. Let me show you. This is an example of a good punch. Did you notice where the punch-ins and punch-outs were? No. That's why it's a good punch. Good punches are like great actors. How do you know great actors? You don't even realize they're acting. Same thing with your punches. Do you want to hear a bad punch? This is one that's on the sustain of a note. I want you to listen, and just very carefully, if you listen, you'll actually hear the change. Even most non-musicians could hear in the first lick at the very end, it almost sounded like there was an extra note or a change in the tone. That's a bad place to do a punch. Now, for those of you who have older units or tape cassette versions, I understand they're going to make noise when you punch, but it's usually on the punch out. This means you can punch in seamlessly, but the punch out is going to leave this gap and a punching noise. What you need to do to fix this, in order to get your mistakes corrected, you're going to have to punch them in the order that the mistakes appear in the song. And every time you punch out, you'll have this big gap that you're going to have to go back before that punch and start punching in again. You'll probably have to do pretty long punches, sometimes entire sections, if you want to fix something. So try to go from the very beginning to the very end, punching in your mistakes in chronological order. And this is the only way that at the end you'll have a punch out, but it's not going to matter because the song is done. Okay, let's track the solo. All right, now that we've finished recording our 8 tracks of music, it's time to mix down. Mixing down is the last step that you have to do. What we need to do now is take the individual sounds and try to make them sound like the song it was meant to be when they're all put together. Since this is a basic video, I'm going to leave it up to you to choose specific levels, panning, EQ settings, and effects. However, I will offer you a few professional tips no matter what level of the recording you're doing. Number 1, the vocals are the most important part of the song. Make sure that the words are clearly understood. If it's an instrumental song, the lead melody is substituting for the vocal line. Number 2, kick and snare should be equal in level to each other. Some groove-based music has the kick up a little louder, and your straight-ahead 4/4 usually has a little stronger snare. The kick or snare, however, should not be so loud that they interfere with the vocals. Remember, they're in the same panning area in the center, right where the vocals are. However, since the kick and snare are short sounds, they can be placed pretty nice and loud in the mix for a good downbeat, strong backbeat without ruining the vocals. Which gets me to my next tip. Remember that long sounds are very greedy when it comes to space in the mix. Short sounds are just the opposite. So, for cleaner mixes, be careful with loud, long sounds, as they will overpower the vocal line, like rhythm electric guitar, cymbal crashes. They're very long and they need to be carefully placed in the mix, not above the mix. Lastly, every style of music has its own appropriate levels. So please listen to a song that was mixed the way you like it and use it as a reference CD in order to find the appropriate levels of sound for your mix. In order to get the overall sound from my mixer to go to my stereo device, I'm going to use those dedicated tape outputs. Now, if you don't have the tape outputs, you're going to have to disconnect your stereo bus from your power amp and connect that straight into your 2-track machine. When you do this and you send the mix, remember, get the highest levels possible without peaking. In this way now, you'll be able to listen to your song away from your studio to enjoy it, criticize it, analyze it, or impress other people. Here we go.
Take a good look on your way.
I hope this video has helped and inspired you to record all the music you have inside you. Peace and good luck with all of your recording endeavors.
Take a good look on your way out. Try